In a tense courtroom, a woman is accused of a minor offense and faces judgment from a tough, experienced judge. However, the atmosphere changes when the woman reveals her USSS, United States Secret Service badge, flashing it toward the judge. The room goes silent in shock. Before we get into the details of the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, and all eyes turned toward the woman who stepped inside. Vanessa Carter walked in with quiet confidence, her polished black pantsuit tailored to perfection, her hair neatly pulled back into a bun. She moved with an air of purpose, her every step measured and controlled. Yet, despite her composed demeanor, she could feel the weight of the stares, the unspoken judgments from those around her. Some looked on with mild curiosity, others with thinly veiled condescension. She had been summoned here for something as trivial as an alleged failure to signal while changing lanes. It is a routine traffic violation, nothing more. And yet, something about the situation felt off. The way the officer who stopped her had behaved, the way this case had so quickly gone to court, none of it sat right with her. But Vanessa had been in enough high-pressure situations to know that losing her temper wouldn't serve her. Instead, she focused on what was in front of her. Judge Ronald Whitmore sat high above on the bench, his thinning gray hair combed neatly back, his sharp, beady eyes scanning her with something between amusement and skepticism. He was known for his old-fashioned views, the kind of man who rarely hid his biases, especially when it came to people like her. He peered at her over his glasses and smirked. "Miss Carter, you're representing yourself." His voice carried a thick layer of mockery, loud enough for the courtroom to hear. A few people chuckled under their breath. A bailiff coughed to stifle a smirk. The atmosphere shifted slightly, an unspoken assumption hanging in the air, that this was a woman who had no business standing in a courtroom without a lawyer, that she was just another defendant hoping to talk her way out of trouble. Vanessa met the judge's gaze without flinching. "Yes, Your Honor." Whitmore leaned back in his chair, studying her as though he was sizing her up. "Well, that's bold." He shook his head slightly, his smirk widening as he looked down at the case file. "This should be quick." The laughter in the room grew just a little louder. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with an air of self-importance, exchanged a knowing glance with the judge. It was clear they thought they already knew how this was going to go. To them, Vanessa Carter was just another woman who had made the mistake of thinking she could take on the system. But what none of them realized, what none of them had even considered, was that Vanessa was no ordinary defendant. And before this day was over, she was going to prove it. The courtroom settled, and the prosecutor stood, adjusting his tie as he prepared to speak. His name was Daniel Pierce, a man with years of experience handling minor cases like this one. He had walked into the room with an air of self-importance, already convinced that this was going to be an easy win. He barely spared Vanessa a glance as he picked up the case file from his desk. "Your Honor," he began, his voice thick with artificial politeness, "the facts here are straightforward. The defendant was pulled over for a traffic violation, failure to signal while changing lanes. When stopped, she refused to comply immediately with the officer's requests." He flipped through the file with exaggerated ease, as if this case was too trivial to deserve his full attention. "It's all in the report." Vanessa sat still, her hands clasped in front of her, her face unreadable. She had seen this kind of performance before, a man in a suit, standing in front of a courtroom, spinning a version of the truth that conveniently left out key details. Judge Whitmore folded his hands in front of him, nodding slowly. He turned his gaze toward Vanessa. "Miss Carter, do you contest these facts?" Vanessa arched an eyebrow. "Your Honor." The judge let out a small chuckle, as if amused by her defiance. "Of course you do." He shook his head, then gestured for her to continue. "By all means, enlighten us." Vanessa rose from her chair and smoothed the front of her blazer. "Your Honor, I did not refuse to comply with the officer's requests. I simply asked why I was being pulled over before immediately handing over my identification. She met the judge's gaze unshaken. That is well within my legal rights. Judge Whitmore exchanged a glance with Pierce, who smirked as he crossed his arms. The prosecutor took a step forward. Miss Carter, are you suggesting the officer had no legal reason to stop you? Vanessa tilted her head slightly. I'm suggesting that the officer assumed me before I even rolled my window down, and that assumption influenced how he handled the stop. Another quiet chuckle from the judge. So now you're implying there was bias involved? His tone was dripping with skepticism. Miss Carter, let me remind you that this is a simple traffic violation. You're not arguing before the Supreme Court. A few soft laughs echoed through the room. Even the stenographer, who had remained mostly expressionless, smirked slightly. Vanessa let the moment pass. She had dealt with this kind of dismissiveness before. The rolling eyes, the patronizing tones, the unspoken but ever-present suggestion that she was just another person trying to make excuses. But what they didn't realize was that she had come prepared. She reached into her pocket and placed a single sheet of paper on the defendant's table. Your Honor, I have here a copy of the officer's body cam footage report. The timestamp shows that I asked why I was being stopped, and within 10 seconds, I handed over my ID. That is not refusal. She turned to the judge, her voice unwavering. That is a right. The murmurs in the courtroom quieted. Pierce glanced at the file in his hands, shifting uncomfortably. Judge Whitmore's smirk didn't fade, but something in his expression stiffened. For the first time, the room began to realize that this wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. Vanessa remained standing, her posture unshaken. I know the law, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. The question is, does this court... The laughter stopped. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom as Vanessa's words hung in the air. The smirks disappeared. The quiet chuckles faded. For the first time since she had walked in, the judge seemed genuinely unsettled. Judge Whitmore shifted in his chair, clearing his throat as he glanced at the prosecutor, who now looked far less confident than before. Vanessa could feel the tension crackling in the air, but she wasn't finished yet. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her wallet. The leather case gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she flipped it open and held it up for everyone to see. The room froze. Inside the wallet was her United States Secret Service badge. The prosecutor's face drained of color. The bailiff, who had been smirking earlier, stiffened. And Judge Whitmore? For the first time, he looked completely caught off guard. His lips parted slightly, as if his mind was struggling to process what he was looking at. I am a federal agent, Your Honor, Vanessa said, her voice firm yet composed. Special Agent Vanessa Carter, United States Secret Service. She let the words settle before continuing. I investigate threats to national security. I know the law inside and out. And I also know when it's being manipulated to target the wrong people. Judge Whitmore's face twitched slightly, as if he had just swallowed something bitter. He glanced at the prosecutor, whose fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through his papers, as if hoping to find something, anything, that could save him from the embarrassing mistake they had just made. The courtroom was so silent that the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard. Gone were the quiet chuckles, the smirks, and the dismissive glances. In their place was a heavy realization that they had underestimated the wrong person. Vanessa took a slow step forward, her badge still in full view. The officer who stopped me assumed I was just another woman who wouldn't question him. She continued. This court assumed I wouldn't fight back. She let her eyes settle on Judge Whitmore. But you all assumed wrong. The judge opened his mouth as if to say something but quickly closed it again. His hand, which had been resting comfortably on his gavel moments ago, now tightened slightly. I believe the prosecution was about to drop the case. Vanessa prompted, arching an eyebrow. The prosecutor swallowed hard and adjusted his tie. Your Honor, given these new circumstances, the state moves to dismiss the charges. Judge Whitmore hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding. "Case dismissed," he said, his voice noticeably quieter than before. Vanessa gave a small nod, snapped her badge wallet shut, and tucked it back into her blazer. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. But just before she reached the door, she paused and glanced back at the judge. "I suggest you think twice before underestimating people based on their appearance, Your Honor," she said smoothly. Then, with the same quiet confidence she had entered with, she strode out, leaving behind a courtroom full of people who would never forget the day they laughed at the wrong woman. The moment Vanessa stepped out of the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter, freer. The murmurs that had once mocked her had turned into hushed whispers of disbelief. She walked down the courthouse hallway with the same unwavering confidence she had entered with. But now, there was a quiet satisfaction in each step. Judge Whitmore remained frozen at his bench, gripping his gavel as if it were the only thing grounding him. His face was still flushed, his pride visibly bruised. Never in his decades on the bench had he been so thoroughly put in his place. The prosecutor, still reeling from his own embarrassment, hurriedly gathered his papers, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The bailiff, who had chuckled earlier, now kept his gaze firmly on the floor. Outside, a few reporters had gathered, sensing that something unusual had just happened in that courtroom. A young journalist rushed forward, microphone in hand. "Agent Carter, do you have any comments on today's hearing?" Vanessa paused for a moment, then gave a small, knowing smile. "Just one." She met the reporter's gaze. "Never judge a book by its cover." With that, she turned and walked away, her words lingering in the air like an unshakable truth. That day, news of the courtroom incident spread fast. People who had once scoffed at Vanessa now spoke of her with admiration, their laughter replaced with respect. Judge Whitmore never quite recovered from the embarrassment, and the prosecutor learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions. But for Vanessa, this was nothing new. She had spent her career proving people wrong, dismantling prejudices one case at a time. And this was just another reminder that no matter how many times the world tried to underestimate her, she would always be 10 steps ahead. As she climbed into her car and started the engine, she didn't need validation or applause. She had already won, long before she ever stepped into that courtroom.